issues for our online audience. And welcome everyone. It really is lovely to see a room full of people, especially this morning's weather. I really didn't expect this. So I'm very grateful for your attendance because I hope it will contribute to a robust discussion, because today is really all about having a conversation. So welcome. And I'm Nisha Jacob. For those who don't know me, I'm a public health physician in the Division of Public Health Medicine. And really today is intended to be a departmental conversation on an emerging topic that many of us have been grappling with. And the issue of social media and public health has come up in a few of our departmental and divisional meeting spaces. And these discussions have led to today's noon meeting. And interestingly, in trying to plan the session, a lot of people who I approached shied away and said that they are not an expert in this topic. But in my opinion, there are really no experts in this topic. So I want to express quite clearly that I am not an expert in the topic. However, I am a user of social media and I am passionate about public health. And as a member of the Departmental Social Media Committee, I try to amplify public health messages, but I've also become more curious about whether we need a more organized approach to social media and public health. So how the session will work is that I'll deliver a short presentation outlining some of the issues, and then I'll hand over to our fantastic panel to kickstart the conversation. And you'll notice that we've allocated an extra 30 minutes for today's noon meeting to allow time for ample discussion. So we hope those will be able, those who are online and here in the venue, will be able to stay a bit longer, but of course we understand if you scheduled it as per normal noon meeting. And joining us on the panel today, we have Prof. Andrea Rother, Dr. Kerrin Begg, Dr. Frissiano Honwana, and Rethea Deetlefs will be joining us online, but I'm going to introduce them all properly and in a bit more detail and welcome them when we have the panel discussion. And so that's how it's going to work. And we really want to encourage a lot of audience participation when we get to the discussion part. So please line up your questions and your comments, and I hope we'll have a productive session today. So to start off, what do we mean by social media? So a textbook definition would be online platforms that enable users to create, share, and interact with content amongst virtual communities and networks. And we've listed a couple of examples here and how people engage with it. And it's quite well known that there's a lot of cross-pollination between these different platforms. So there may be a YouTube video that's then circulated on Snapchat or WhatsApp. There may be screenshots of things posted on Facebook and Twitter doing the rounds on WhatsApp and so forth. So they really do interact quite intensively. And over the past couple of years, social media use has been growing, and worldwide over 5 billion people actively use social media. That equates to 64% of the population and 95% of internet users, with about 240 million new users per year. And an average person, you can tell me if you think this is right, spends about 2 hours and 27 minutes on social media daily. And an average person has about 7 social media accounts. And the most popular worldwide is Facebook with over 3 billion users, YouTube, then Instagram and WhatsApp. But there is a caveat with these kind of data in that there's sometimes duplication because people have multiple identities on social media. But they say that they have tried to tease this out as much as possible, but it is still a limitation. So if we focus more on South Africa specifically, we have 26.7 million active users. That's 41.5% of our population, with a fairly even split between males and females. Our most popular platform in South Africa is WhatsApp, followed by Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. And so over the past decade, we've seen a massive shift from traditional media to user-generated content. And you can see in this map, it gives you an idea of social media use in different areas. And social media growth has stabilized in high-income countries, but rising sharply in low and middle-income countries, reflective of the digital divide that we're becoming more and more aware of. Social media has also become a primary source of news, with content needing to be shareable and likable. But interestingly, the average read time of this content is about 15 seconds or less per post, and the average watch time is about 10 seconds or less per post. And so social media really presents a lot of opportunities for public health, and I'll go through a couple of examples. So social media can be used for health promotion, which includes different kinds of health promotion, including health education, and encourage and raise awareness on preventative behaviors. So over here, I've got a little screenshot from the UCT Division of Public Health Medicine social media account, where we are spotlighting and raising awareness about various topics that are of importance in local communities. In this case, is the issue of food safety practices and food labels, and also raising awareness of the work that organizations in local communities do, use it to advertise events and so forth. So it can be used to encourage and raise awareness on health promotion and preventative behaviors. And then we saw very clearly during COVID that social media was very useful for crisis communication. And there were many examples from health authorities like the WHO posting regular updates and advisories on social media. And then social media provides a platform for community engagement on current issues, as well as advocacy, like the hashtag #MeToo movement and the hashtag Black Lives Matter movement. And it fosters social and professional connectivity, as well as professional development. And this is particularly for young professionals, early career researchers, and so forth, who broaden their networks widely on social media, where travel may be difficult and accessing different people in their disciplines are difficult. And social media gives that platform. And then social media also offers a platform for research, which is often less explored, as well as for health surveillance and monitoring. And then research communication. So social media platforms like Twitter and LinkedIn, Twitter as it was formerly known, now X, are very well known as platforms where research is showcased and communicated to the public in bite-sized, accessible formats. And social media can be used to influence policy, as well as provide enhanced public health teaching opportunities. And I think we saw this again amplified during COVID, where various platforms were harnessed to provide educational materials. But of course, we all know too well that social media comes with direct risks and harms. And that's what we'll be discussing a little bit more today. And the major one that lately we seem to be encountering on a daily basis is misinformation and disinformation, and the algorithmic sensationalism of this, because the algorithms will often pull out and showcase the controversial things that stimulate debate, which can be healthy, but often leads to a lot of polarization and can even escalate to violence. Social media is also known to cause health anxiety and information overload, as well as mental health deterioration, particularly among adolescents. And then social media provides a platform to perpetuate stigma and online harassment, as well as cyberbullying, and polarization, where even health information is enmeshed with political affiliations. There are data privacy concerns, a decline in public trust, and then as much as communication is enhanced during crises, panic can also be exaggerated. And so this headline that I have here alludes to some of the riots that happened in Dublin and London as a result of social media amplifying misinformation, sharing it widely, and then prompting people to rally into and enact violence when actually no information was even verified at the time. And then social media also supports the aggressive marketing of harmful products through influencers and so forth, and supports self-diagnosis and delayed health-seeking behavior. And of course, there are the deadly challenge contests and the fads. Something that seems to be doing the round lately is raw milk. And here you have a picture of someone feeding their child milk directly from the udder of a cow. And so these are all examples of the risks and harms of social media for public health that perhaps need a little bit of thought. But you can see that there is a lot to talk about regarding social media and public health, and there's no way that we'll be able to delve into all of this in one session. So what we'd like to focus on today is on the key issue of our roles and responsibilities of public health professionals and academics in the growing social media space. And as much as we can try to speak only from an organizational perspective, the reality is that our individual and organizational identities are often merged in social media. And as a result, we need to be cognizant of both personal and organizational perspectives. So I'm going to start off with a personal case study. So Personally, I've been a late adopter of most social media platforms, and I usually only delve into it out of necessity rather than to explore. And so I only joined Twitter, as it was then called, in 2020, with a real need to keep it up to date with the ever-evolving COVID information and the scientific discourse around it. And so that's what led me to join Twitter. And during the vaccine rollout, I was constantly frustrated by the misinformation being peddled by medical doctors. And this inspired my daughter to make a comic about vaccines, which I posted on Twitter, expecting my 5 followers to look at. But then the post actually went viral. And before we knew it, it was picked up by mainstream media. And it was really mind-blowing. The attention inspired my daughter to make a sequel. And then I was bowled over by how many people reached out with questions and with interest and wanting to find out more. And, I thought this is fantastic. And this is the power of social media. And by the time she made the 3rd comic, the attention went global, which was very exciting, but also really mind-blowing to see the power of social media. But you will see here in our coveted Bill Gates retweet that he has limited replies to those whom he follows or has mentioned, which is something that most celebrities and high-profile people do. But little old me, who was a nobody on Twitter, didn't do that. And as a result, before I knew it, my Twitter profile and my direct messages were flooded with messages that were questioning my motherhood and how I let my child spend their time, telling me that I was a puppet of a government or a minion of will, and some really nasty, nasty ones, and I've actually only posted the decent ones here. But it was really flooded, it really flooded my profile, and it definitely affirmed my decision that my daughter wouldn't be going anywhere near social media anytime soon, but also revealed the 2 sides of social media to me very, very clearly. But obviously, this is not an isolated example at all. And so over the past few years, we've seen many examples of academics and students sparring on social media between institutions and within our own university. So here we have our own emeritus professor being taken on by the Wits Dean of Health. We've seen academics within our faculty call out misinformation, especially from those within the medical community. And then there are many other examples where our institution has featured on social media, both positively and negatively. But, and I'm sure you've all seen various different examples, I had to pick and choose to see what to put on the slide. But what I want to highlight is a more subtle example. So here, this post was reposted by a reputable unit in our Faculty of Health Sciences during the COVID pandemic. So at face value, it's a repost of something that a doctor posted, and there's a picture of the World Health Organization. So it seems, pretty reputable. And given that average read time and watch time is 10 seconds or 15 seconds, at a quick glance, this looks fine. But if you actually read it on closer examination, it's an article alluding to anti-vax sentiments and government mistrust, and it's calling, back in 2020, on the US to leave the World Health Organization, which is now a reality. And then, if you look at where this article came from, it's a media group that promotes conspiracy theories like QAnon, the Great Replacement, anti-vaccine misinformation, and false claims of fraud in the 2020 United States presidential election. So it's completely gone down a different path, but shared by our own faculty unit. And similarly, the same unit posted this article. And again, if you look at it, it seems scientific, and it is. It's an article, it's a scientific article looking at myocarditis and COVID-19 vaccination. But if you look at the way it's being posted, the interpretation is completely misleading and frankly makes no sense. And then if you interrogate the profile, so it's a doctor, but a doctor holding some very extremist views that are harmful to public health. And so both these posts were posted by a unit in the faculty suggesting support to many students or staff members or public who may follow this account and thereby knowingly or unknowingly perpetuate harmful misinformation. And it's not just during the pandemic. So just this year, we had a viral deep fake of Professor Abdul Karim doing the rounds. We have this was celebrities, an example of celebrities on the wildly popular Joe Rogan podcast, which is very popular but is quite heavy with misinformation, continuing to advertise ivermectin inappropriately. And then there are a multitude of examples of various misinformation campaigns online. So in some of these examples, CAPRISA, where Professor Abdul Karim comes from, the Department of Health, our National Department of Health, the Canadian Cancer Society over here, they all called it out and debunked the false claims. But how many more posts, videos, and podcasts are out there that are not called out or only called out after the damage is done? So going back in time, I must highlight that pseudoscience and misinformation is not new, and it's not something exclusive to the era of social media. And so here you have some content from the early 1900s, also spewing some anti-vax sentiments. And then we have Mark Twain's famous quote that a lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth has put its boots on, was just as relevant before social media. But what social media adds to this is the speed of pseudoscience. So this is an example of a timeline that followed after Elon Musk posted his suggestion on chloroquine for COVID-19 early in the pandemic. And the document that he's referenced here was later removed. However, you can see that within 5 days, that viral tweet, which was then amplified by Donald Trump, led to a man dying from ingestion of chloroquine. And his wife, who had also ingested, was hospitalized, saying that she heard about the drug from Trump. And then if you look at this timeline, though, so that happened in 5 days, it takes more than a month for formal advisories and recommendations about using chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for COVID actually came out and said that this is not a recommendation. But at that point and during that whole process, which is needed, a lot of misinformation and damage is being done. And what we're seeing now, however, a few years later, is the power of social media leading to institutionalized disinformation, with the Trump administration spearheaded by their head of health, RFK Jr., who on a daily basis goes against sound scientific evidence and further abuses and discredits scientists as though science is purely a matter of opinion. So, with all of that background, the big question is, how should academia respond to this? So I've had many conversations with different people around this, and one answer I often get is it's an American problem. It has nothing to do with us, where evidence-based practice is still valued. However, I do think that we may underestimate America's major global influence. And I think we can see that influence just through the funding cuts that many of us are living through this year. And it emboldens those in other countries who perpetuate misinformation and disinformation, giving them a greater voice. But I also think we may be easily forgetting a period in our own public health history where our country grappled with AIDS denialism and misinformation that thankfully did not have the leverage of social media at the time. And so whether it's an American problem or not might need some reconsideration. So then another approach is to disengage completely or find new spaces, which many scientists did. So when Elon Musk took control of Twitter in 2022, there were many scientists who did not want to support his extreme right-wing views and his general approach to managing the site because content moderation was out. The blue check verification system was replaced by a system in favor of paying members, giving more voice to misinformation and disinformation. And so many scientists chose to move off Twitter, either completely or moving to Mastodon or LinkedIn or Blue Sky. And then this was followed by an exodus of American scientists from Twitter in 2024, with Donald Trump becoming president for a second term. And the Blue Sky was the chosen home. But this left many scientists in other countries to wonder where to go. Was this just an American thing? And where should they actually go? And so this move has obvious benefits in the mental health of scientists and some protection from harassment. But it has undone some of the advances that Twitter helped to facilitate in inclusivity for academia. And we've lost that real-time collaboration with powerful players and the public through spaces like that. And one could consider that moving to a space where academics predominate results in that elitist academic silo, where we have our sophisticated academic conversations leaving out the public and policymakers and so forth. But on the other hand, some academics have pointed out that platforms like Twitter generated a cadre of academic celebrities And this resulted more in academic popularity contests, which fell short of the academic expertise. And so perhaps that model wasn't all that good in the first place. And so lastly, another option is, should we as academics attempt to address this misinformation and disinformation? But this route is time-consuming, mentally exhausting, and sometimes unsafe. And there's this common meme from the Unbiased Science here that demonstrates how making a false claim any claim takes 5 seconds and no sources, but debunking that claim requires hours of work, numerous citations, and probably a lot of abuse as well in the process. And so whether we want to go that route is something that we might need to consider, whether we need an organized route and an organized approach if we want to attempt to address misinformation and disinformation. So this breaks down our big question to, do we have a responsibility to respond? And do we have the capacity to respond? So as all academics should do, a literature review would be the first step to answer the question. And in my brief review, I found quite a lot of literature actually looking at social media use during infectious diseases outbreaks, a big focus on COVID, but also some interesting findings from Zika and Ebola. And most of the literature highlights the urgent need to leverage social media, not just for communication, but also surveillance and misinformation management. There's a call for collaborative action that includes health authorities, researchers, and the public, and a need to formalize evidence-based strategies for communicating via social media. And there are a couple of tools and frameworks that have been proposed to include members of the community in designing messages and consider partnering with social media influencers. There's a dire need for digital literacy for the public, and more empirical studies needed on how social media can be used proactively, especially from the global south. And then the importance of regulation on content and access to content is highlighted. But to add to the mix of all of this, when we think about a response, we also need to consider geopolitical tensions and threats to free speech, with various incidents this year where scientists have been persecuted for their social media posts. And this is particularly significant amongst those who comment on the Israel-Palestine war. And this threat to free speech has left many, even in our own institutions, scared to voice opinions for fear of funding cuts, for fear of visa denials, and this results in self-censorship. And so an example from our own faculty from earlier this year, where an event was advertised and it was received as offensive. And this raised questions among other organizational units who have social media pages that do advertise similar events as to how these are perceived and whether there are unintended consequences around that. And this prompted some discussion in the faculty around the tension between academic freedom and misinformation. And whether the discussion is essentially highlights that academic freedom is a foundational principle of higher education, but comes with the responsibility to uphold scholarly rigor and maintain professionalism, but also that the freedom does not extend to speech that causes demonstrable harm, including distress, reputational damage, or institutional harm. And does that demonstrable harm include public health harms? And then lastly, to add to the things we must think about, these discussions also beg the question about the role of social media in teaching and learning, and whether we need to explicitly integrate digital literacy in our curricula. Do we need to train students on the critical appraisal of online content in the same way as we teach them to review scientific articles? And importantly, what is our role as digital role models for our students? So as we think about all of these questions, there are a couple of tools and resources to help us, and I've listed some of them here. Of note is the draft National White Paper on Audio and Audiovisual Media Services and Online Safety, which has recently been put out for comment. And this document proposes addressing online harms through co-regulation and ombudsman oversight, as well as prioritizing digital literacy and skills development, especially for the youth, for women, and for rural communities. And other important resources for us at UCT are the recently drafted Digital Presence Framework and the UCT Social Media Guidelines. So in conclusion, I leave you with questions rather than answers. And a common line that I saw in a lot of the articles about social media is that social media is a double-edged sword. But how do we harness its potential while mitigating its risk? and how do we lead with integrity and care to promote health and well-being. And so that's my overview of the topic, and here are some references with acknowledgement to the various media groups who I used to create this presentation. Thank you for your time and attention. So I'd like to introduce and welcome our panel of discussants now to come forward. And I'm first going to give our panel an opportunity to give some initial comments, and then we'll open up to the broader audience for comments. And those who are online, you're welcome to either pop in comments and questions in the chat, but there'll also be an opportunity to raise your hands and ask questions as well, so we can hear you and engage more thoroughly. But to introduce our panel, I think they're all very well known to everyone in our department and our faculty. We have Professor Andrea Rother, who's an environmental health academic, the head of Environmental Health Division and an honorary professor in the Department of Public Health, Environment and Society at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And Andrea's work focuses on reducing and preventing chemical, pesticide, and other environmental health risks. And Andrea has produced over 60 risk communication and research translation materials for policymakers and the public, and actively uses WhatsApp and other social media platforms for this purpose. We have Dr. Kerrin Begg, who is a public health medicine specialist, a health professions educationist, and deputy dean of undergraduate education at our faculty. And she's also a fellow of the International Foundation for Advancement of Medical Education and Research, and brings a wealth of insight from the public, private, and NGO sectors. We have Dr. Frissiano Honwana, who is a biostatistician and lecturer in the Division of Epi and Biostats at the School of Public Health, specializing in prediction modeling. And he convenes courses for the Master of Public Health and MSc programs in the school, and also chairs the Departmental Social Media Committee. And I should just check that we have online Rethea Deetlefs, and we're very glad that Rethea could join us online. And Rethea is the head of online communications at the Communication and Marketing Department here at UCT. And that department is the business and part technical owner of the official UCT web content management system. And part of their departmental duties is the development, implementation of, and oversight of UCT's digital presence. So very warm welcome to our panelists. I'd like to welcome you to take some seats up front, and then we'll open for some comment and discussion. Fantastic. Okay, so one of our panelists is online, so we've got an extra chair over there. Andrea, would you like to maybe kickstart our discussion with a few initial thoughts and comments?
Thanks. So hello to everyone, and thank you so much for that overview. I mean, I think really the start is that none of us are an expert in this, but we're being forced to become an expert because we're using it. So we're actually learning through using. So I was reflecting a lot on, I looked at some of the articles that you had mentioned, and I was reflecting on it. So I'm in environmental health, and I don't engage that much directly with clinicians or medical students, but I do engage with environmental health practitioners, and I engage a lot with regulators. And I was thinking, you know, what is my goal? And for me, that's kind of the starting point. What is the goal of using social media? Why do I engage with it? And I think for me, the main thing is sharing information. So I started using it a lot to share information with regulators in low and middle income countries, particularly in African countries, who don't have access to information, who don't have access to journal articles. But then, of course, comes the responsibility of, I assume that they're going to take this information and be able to then regulate with it, or make some, you know, this is objective information, and then to make some objective decision. But of course, that's not the case. The case is that I have somewhat of an agenda that I'm trying to protect the health of vulnerable populations. And that opens me up then to being attacked by the industry and others. And that's then where this concept then of misinformation comes in, because then, so a lot of what I deal with is data where there's uncertainty. So showing attribution that a particular chemical, for example, causes a particular cancer is difficult. But you still want to share that information, and why? And so for me, I'm reflecting on this, I'm thinking what I'd like people to do is to learn how to engage with uncertainty. And that then interferes or crosses over with this concept of misinformation and disinformation. So how do we transverse this thing of that it's a probable carcinogen, and you want the regulators to know it's a probable carcinogen, you want them to reduce exposures, you want them to put regulations in that take that uncertainty into account. But then that opens up you for attack. And I've been attacked not just by industry, but also by other scientists or researchers who were saying, you know, you're doing a disservice by trying to advocate for a particular chemical, for example, to be banned or restricted, or making sure people don't have access to it. So I thought I'd just start out with that. I mean, I have quite a lot of thoughts, but I think that's, for me, it's this concept of information sharing, which I think is really important. I think a lot of people are now getting access to information that they wouldn't. And particularly in my field, the general public does not have access to, you know, what are the health effects of chemicals. And we see people using pesticides to, you know, remove stains on their clothes. Or we had a minister who was removing evil spirits from people by spraying doom in their faces. So, you know, it's how do we get that kind of information to the public to reduce exposure and risk?
Thanks, Andrea. That's very lot to think about. And I think your point about the uncertainty, when one compares pseudoscience and science, a big issue is that those who post pseudoscientific claims speak it with absolute certainty, whereas scientists are so aware of the biases and the limitations and so forth, so we'll never fully commit to something, but that uncertainty looks like we lose trust by showing that scientific uncertainty. So a very important point. Thanks for that, Andrea. Over to you, Kerrin.
Thank you. So I think we're all going to share some of the aspects about the vulnerability that you have in sharing on social media. So it becomes a space where, as you mentioned earlier, you have both your personal persona and identity, and so you may be sharing things in those spaces, but you're also representing a profession in the terms of public health. And in my case, because I have a role that carries a particular rank with it, that actually I'm often also seen to be speaking on behalf of the faculty or the institution. And so those kind of areas get a bit blurred in terms of positionality, reputation, whether I'm speaking in my personal capacity, whether I'm speaking in the capacity of the institution or the faculty. And so those make it quite tricky. And so I found myself sometimes withdrawing because it's sometimes just too complex. Days are full anyway, and you have to almost pre-think, what are the potential implications? Can anybody misinterpret this? Could anybody, you know, and so I find myself just more and more involved in a quagmire. So my main involvement was during COVID, where I was very active on social media and really tried very hard to, and so my goal at that point, as Andrea was saying, was actually to do some public information sharing. So it was really about translating what was sometimes quite complex studies and knowledge at the time into something that was relatively, that was a little simpler to understand for the general public. I fortunately did have the opportunity as a result of that to then present on radio, TV, and other spaces. And that was a little easier because it actually gives you an opportunity to flesh things out, to have a bit more clarity, but that often is not an opportunity on social media in the bite-sized chunks. And then the floods of commentary, some of which is genuine questioning that's helpful to be able to share, or to be able to answer, but some of it is just abuse. And it gets really difficult to be able to manage that. So I found that the kind of spaces which were really useful to meet the goal were those where we're actually within groups and spaces. So there are some kind of parenting groups or social, so the groups had a little bit more protection. There was an administrator that also managed some of those rules, so that wasn't a space that then I had to do all of that additional work of kind of navigating and managing your space. There were some youth groups that invited me in, so this was particularly focused on rural youth that had limited access to internet and anything, and so actually most of their access was really to WhatsApp. And in that space, that was quite useful because it was also mediated by a facilitator who managed that space. But I must say that it's become at times a really toxic space, and so you kind of have to decide what it is that you share in a public with no boundaries, because obviously if you're sharing information, then that's the kind of space that you would like to be sharing. But sometimes it's just safer to actually share with a group of friends and family that know. But certainly I found that if you're consistent and clear and caring, that people often then seek you out for opinion. And so I would often find myself tagged and to answer queries, etc., etc. But once again, that kind of quagmire of walking in and thinking, what are their interests, who do they represent, where do they come from, who's it going to be shared with, who's there, the space that they navigate in. And so it felt a hang of a lot more work than the message that you were trying to share, because it was often quite overwhelming. So I got to a point where I found that my own mental health was also really important, and so I withdrew from some of the social media platforms.
Thanks, Kerrin. And this is the reality, I think, that a lot of us faced during COVID, and I don't think people have recovered since then. To those standing at the back, there are some seats up front here, so please feel free to come and join. So I'm going to hand over to Frissiano for some thoughts.
Yes, thank you for the comments so far. So coming in as a biostatistician, where we mostly work with the numbers and we sit isolated with our computers, we punch in the numbers and we go back and we give feedback in terms of these are the trends that we have seen. So in public, especially during the COVID time, it was noticeable that some of the numbers, just people would post numbers and things like a relative risk, it can get misinterpreted. So I found that maybe there's also a need for some literacy when it comes to how do you communicate numbers in the public? How are those, maybe if you're talking about maybe proportions, do you have to look for other things? For instance, if maybe we're talking about the time when people were promoting vaccines, there were a lot of things that were not considered. For instance, if you are looking at maybe the characteristics of the people that had the vaccine, how old were they? So there are many things that should be taken into account before people can, in a way, express those numbers. So, and what I found is that most of the professionals, especially the biostatisticians, what you pointed out earlier, they've moved from Twitter to Blue Sky because of the abuse that they are getting, when in a way they become a voice of reason to say, hang on, maybe these numbers, we need to reconsider these numbers. So those are the things that we have seen in terms of like how it has affected the different use within the social media world. So those are some of the opening remarks that I'm seeing on social media.
Great. Thanks, Frissiano. Maybe just to ask, so with the shift to Blue Sky, there's a lot of people who say that it's more of an American shift. And are we seeing this difference in scientific use of social media platforms? Is it sort of very American-centric, or are you finding, or do you, I mean, I'm not sure if you're on Blue Sky, but...
I also had to check out Blue Sky to see what's happening. So, yes, it is global, but mostly the Europeans are there.
Okay.
They're expecting the field, most of them are shifting to Blue Sky.
Okay, all right, interesting. Thanks very much to our in-house panelists. I'd now like to give Rethea Deetlefs an opportunity to comment. Over to you, Rethea.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do is just introduce or talk about the status of social media governance at UCT and what it will cover. So as noted, alongside the opportunities that social media affords us, there are quite grave risks, and it's absolutely imperative that we have social media governance to help us mitigate those risks. So there is no social media governance at the moment. There is a draft policy that is in the ratification process. I'm really hoping that we'll have it ratified by the end of the year, as long as it doesn't get torpedoed at Senate and Council, I fervently hope. Standards and guidelines, however, are available already. They haven't been disseminated because we're in a bit of a catch-22 situation. UCT should have a social media register of all social media accounts, because obviously you can't govern what you don't know about. But there is no governance that says that anybody must tell CMD that they have an account. So we have a start of a website register. Obviously because of this, we don't have a list of people that we can easily email what we've got to already, the standards and guidelines. The standards would be compulsory, of course, whereas the guidelines will be a living document. We're also working on a community of practice, which will in the first instance be aimed at web practitioners, simply because of resource constraints on the part of CMD and the ICTS training team who are collaborating on putting this in place. But the idea is also that this community of practice will be for social media practitioners as well. And also we would want to set up training that should be made compulsory. In the web arena, we have many people that can be considered web illiterate who are tasked with updating websites and so forth, and that causes problems in itself. The same scenario on social media could backfire quite badly to have social media illiterate people, also because of resource constraints, because nobody's got social media experts just lying around that can be applied. So obviously the aim of governance is in the first instance to provide support, to manage risk, but very importantly, it's also there to provide support and guidance and to remove ambiguities. So briefly, what the social media governance will cover are the following stipulations. The fact that you obviously have to comply with South African legislation, but importantly also UCT codes of conduct, rules and regulations. To be careful about what you do with confidential information and to be compliant with POPIA. Branding is very important. These are official accounts that ultimately belong to UCT and it should be appropriately branded. Naturally, they will cover roles and responsibilities around account ownership, content creation and management, and the importance of moderation. Then also the responsible use of AI tools, which are more and more sort of part of our lives and part of social media and web. And then the kind of nuts and bolts side of things, for instance, I did mention the social media register, and then also due process to follow in terms of how you set up your social media account and so forth. For instance, not creating an account with a staff email account, but using a generic account instead, which can be passed on to somebody else. So, and finally, the governance does venture into the sphere of personal accounts as well, because staff and students have obligations to UCT by virtue of being employees and students, for instance, not bring UCT into disrepute. And as alluded to already, it's very easy to blur the line between speaking for the university, speaking for the UCT entity you belong to, and speaking for yourself in a personal capacity versus your capacity as a staff member. So yeah, I think that's sort of at a trot, running through the social media that we're intending to, governance that we're intending to put in place. We'd be quite happy to take any questions and queries around it, and also to provide the standards and guidelines to any who want them. I can't provide I don't want to disseminate the social media policy draft yet until it's been ratified, but that will be done at that point. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rethea. That's given us quite a lot of institutional background, and I hope everyone at the back could also hear, and really highlighting the governance challenges, the need for a social media register, the need for social media literacy, and to align this with our core values and our codes of conduct. And then I think something that I hadn't touched on at all in the presentation is also how AI is now integrated with social media, and so that's another whole topic on its own. And some of you may have recently seen, I mean, if you're still on X, that X has an AI chatbot called Grok, which was actually calling out some of the misinformation on X, which led Elon Musk to tweak it, and then it became sort of a mini Hitler, with them requiring to take it offline to tweak it back again. And this is the reality that people are facing, and that AI brings into the picture as well. So thank you, Rethea. That's very useful insights from an organizational perspective, and also highlighting the responsibility that we have as staff and students of UCT, not to bring disrepute to our institution as well. So I'd like to give our wonderful audience here, who've made the effort to come and show up in person, to give some comments and questions. I think we'll start with the in-house in the venue, and then we'll move on to online. And I just maybe note that Pancho has commented that since some epidemiologists remain on X because they know that the masses are still there and haven't necessarily moved to Blue Sky. Jack, I see your hand, and we will get to you once we've gone through our in-house questions. So Rosa and then Tony.
Thanks. Thank you very much. This was a really informative session, and thanks to the panel for your insightful comments on this. So I have a few things to pick up from the presentation, and I think recommendations as well, in terms of, because it's a really important issue. I mean, the reason why the anti-vaxxers have been successful, and why the anti-lobby anything has been successful, is that they usually shout louder than we do, right? As health professionals. So your question is, do we have a responsibility? And my answer would be absolutely, and that's the reason why. Because if there isn't a big enough voice to counter, it's just not something going to happen. So two recommendations. One is for curriculum. You touched on digital literacies for students, and I think that has to definitely be a part of it. I know that they get digital literacies in first year, the library does it, but I'm wondering if we actually need to spiral that, and it needs to be, the messages need to be reinforced every year, to a point where students know how to use that as an advocacy tool, because that ties into the AfriMed's competency framework, where we're expecting our students to graduate with the competency of being health advocates. So digital advocacy now has become a really important skill, and how to use it properly and harness it to impact health. So I think we definitely need to look into that, and now's the time, because we are in a curriculum reform process, and rewriting that. And then the second thing is, it comes back to something you touched on, Kerrin, about being easier in groups. So in terms of having a louder voice, I think it will be easier, and also because capacity is the issue. So individual capacity, it's hard, it's toxic. It's, you know, I've also had a lot of anxiety around being attacked and whatever, and I've withdrawn from certain platforms because it really becomes hard. But if it's an organization or a group, a reputable group that is putting out evidence-based information to counter the misinformation, I think that can work. And that organization can consist of a different range of health professionals that people can provide questions to online, or if we pick up misinformation, we can say, okay, we found this, but it is incorrect and this is why. So then it doesn't come from us personally, and we don't get attacked personally. It's an organization, and we manage it. It's a couple of steps that takes you back, and I think it decreases the anxiety while getting the message out there. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Great recommendations, Feroza. And I think part of today is also, I completely agree with your approach of having an organizational way of dealing with this. But currently we don't have such an approach. So we do have different units, etc., but they're all kind of doing their own thing. And one person who's busy with various other tasks and responsibilities may amplify some messages or not. But we aren't actually doing it with a broader strategy or an approach to specific things. So
the other thing is that that then also should form part of the person's social responsibility portfolio. So, part of it then becomes an incentive in terms of promotion, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Great. Thanks, Feroza. Tony?
So thanks for some really great inputs. It's really interesting. I wanted to ask you, so in your brief literature review, what is the evidence that putting effort and resources into combating misinformation is effective? So the department where I used to work has a policy that they do not respond to social media posts, whatever. They note them, but they don't actually respond to them. And you had one slide where you showed that the amount of time you have to spend debunking is inordinately greater than the amount of time it takes to put out misinformation. So the department's attitude is, it's rather, we've got such limited resources anyway, and now science has such limited resources with the Trump debacle. Should we not rather put our effort into trying to get the positive, evidence-based, good news stories out there, and just forget about what's going on social media, because you're never going to be able to combat these people at their own game. That's my attitude. I don't have any social media accounts. I don't regard WhatsApp as social media. But you could say, well, you're just like an ostrich with its head in the sand.
Yeah, really, really good point, Tony. I didn't actually find a lot of information on, measuring the impact of strategies, because I don't think there are that many organized strategies to look at this, and maybe it's an area for more research. It's interesting to see that there's a policy to not respond, but I noticed from the way you said there's a they versus us. But the problems then arise when part of the misinformation comes from us. And if we don't have an organized approach to it, then we're kind of fighting with ourselves as well. And so without regulation, that's a big challenge. And I think that's possibly what led to this new white paper that I mentioned, that's trying to get more regulation and have an ombudsman look at this and so forth for more regulation and oversight around it. But it's very tricky, and that's part of the reason we have this conversation, because sometimes you have lone individuals trying to fight the battle, but if we don't do anything, these echo chambers just get louder and louder and louder, and you end up with institutionalized misinformation like we're seeing in America, where we saw over the past 4 years that social media power has entrenched itself. And so that's really the challenge, and so it's very tricky, and I agree, but I really agree with your points. I'm very interested to hear that you've explicitly been told not to respond, and this is the challenge that we face. So great comments and questions. I'm going to let our panelists also respond to some of these, but I just want to give Ishak Date, who's online, a chance to give his comments and questions.
Thank you. Just first of all, a sound check. Is my sound coming okay?
Oh, it's very soft, Ishak.
Very soft. Let me try now. How it sounds a bit better?
But maybe if he talks, and then we can just repeat it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I can try my laptop speaker. Just hang on, Ishak.
But then I need to.
Okay, can I try and say
Ishak,
something?
do you want to try now?
Okay, let me try. It's coming through with a bit of an echo, but let me try. So I want to make 2 points. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so the first point is just regarding misinformation, and it is an old age thing. If we think about, for example, the the smoking corporations and the alcohol corporations that have been deliberately kind of spreading misinformation around these things. So, and our response as a public health community, in some instances, have been robust, and in other instances has been not enough with regards to these corporate misinformations. And the second point I just wanted to make was a example from COVID, where we used community leaders to amplify messages of true information versus misinformation. And one example was we had this brilliant Islamic scholar who unfortunately succumbed to COVID, but he digested the information in such a brilliant way that we were able to actively fight against some of the people that were spreading misinformation using our community leaders as leverage. So for us to consider using a whole of society approach, we can't do everything, we can't be everywhere, but our leaders and our influencers could be people that we could call upon to assist us.
Okay, I am going to change this. Okay, there we go. Can you hear us online?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Thanks, Ishak. Some useful comments there as well. I want to give our panelists an opportunity to respond. I just want to highlight that in the chat there are some comments, and Rethea, one of our panelists who spoke on UCT's online, on behalf of UCT Online essentially, is that a very large percentage of people get their information and news from social media. So silence from scientists would be very problematic. But I also think there is a difference between getting into social media battles and posting evidence-based information. So to kind of disengage from the one-on-one kind of conflict, but to still be putting the information out there for people to be able to consume. So very wise words there, Rethea. I'm going to ask if any of our panelists would like to respond to some of the questions and comments that have been raised. Andrea, go for it.
Thanks. So I'd like to respond to Rose's comment about digital literacy and putting it in the curriculum and training our students. And I was thinking, well, you actually need to train the lecturers as well, not just the students, so that we're on one page with what is, I was trying to think, what is digital literacy and what is digital illiteracy? Is it the same as visual literacy, numeracy literacy, and sort of standard literacy? But while you were speaking, one of the things I thought is, we do research translation, so we teach our students how to translate the data that they're getting into bite-sized pieces that are for regulators, particularly in one of the programs that I have. And so we're teaching them how to do infographics, and then often they use these infographics in policy briefs or they post them on social media. And so it made me think that we actually should be looking at opportunities within our own curriculum where we are touching on the realms of social media. So this is something that I particularly think I'd like to take up, because we are teaching our students how to do infographics, and that is very much then going to be used on social media. Yeah. So thanks for that.
Great. Yeah.
Kerrin? Perhaps also similar to, so I think the whole aspect for curriculum is really important. The other part that we recognize that we're needing to remind, so we have a whole range of influencers amongst our own students who have blogs and podcasts that they do quite regularly, and some of them are really good, but some of them we recognize that we're also having to alert around some of the management. So although we do actually have a social media policy as in a code of conduct, and we do share that with students, and we do remind them, is that with this year we've had a complaint from the health department. As it turns out, the health department got the identity of the student incorrect. They were from another university. But be that as it may, it was a headline to us that they were taking their filming on provincial property, And so it just reminds us that, you know, there's all sorts of ethical issues related to our students who are blogging, and doing all of those kinds of things as well. So it just means that we have to up the education in those aspects. So our students are both using it for education, but also using it for influencing purposes, and we just need to recognize that it is what it is. We just need to help them navigate that. I also remind students, and certainly of those of us as health professionals, that we all subscribe to the Health Professionals Council of South Africa, and that includes that whatever happens in your public life is also judged in terms of your professional life. And so I remind them every year that if something happens in your personal life that is unacceptable, that actually Health Professions Council doesn't distinguish between whether that was in your work time hours or after hours. And so I think that's also part of the digital literacy, is that it's, you know, you can't distinguish between what you do in your personal time and what you do in your work time.
I think the Coldplay CEO made that quite obvious. I saw a couple of hands at the back, so I'm going to first ask Prof. London. Oh. Okay.
Hi everybody, my name is Nisha. I'm from the Division of Ethical Stats. I have a question for the first panelist. You mentioned that what's important when posting out there is really about what's the goal of the posting time for you. I just wanted to ask, do you find that thinking about who is this for is also important? Because sometimes I see a disconnect between, let's say, LinkedIn or TikTok, where on LinkedIn we talk about this funding cuts and it's very passionate, and then on TikTok it's like, you know, there's one video and it's not really talked about a lot in that space. Do you feel like something as academia that we should focus on as well is to be very clear what this post is, who is it for, and do you feel like, I guess the way we say it will change if we have that at the back of our heads, and how we could in fact cross-bridge these two platforms?
Okay, let's take a round of questions and then we'll let the panelists respond. So 2 hands at the back. Yeah, go for it. Ali? Yeah.
Hi, thank you all so much for being here today and facilitating this conversation. I'm an elective student with the Global Surgery Division, and my question kind of speaks to the conversation around when to engage versus disengage. So I think this is kind of thinking about the whole Elon Musk and Trump situation that happened, but how do you find a balance between navigating the spread of mis or disinformation, and also thinking about the fact that people kind of have a responsibility of being critical of the information that they consume online? Yeah.
Okay, good, insightful question. Thanks, Alif. And there was one more hand. No? There was, okay, Prof. London and then Nesbitt.
So just follow up Kerrin's comments. So I looked online, and the Health Professions Council guidelines are quite old. So it's one thing to say that if you post something that's unprofessional, you'll get into trouble. That we know. But if you post misinformation, there's a real grey zone, and the Health Professions Council is not giving us direction. If you look at their policy, their ethical guidelines on social media, everything except misinformation on social media. So isn't there a place for some concerted agreement as to when you've overstepped the professional boundaries by posting misinformation? It would seem to me that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of us are dealing with outdated guidelines that really haven't adapted to this era of social media. Nesbitt?
Yeah. So I think I wanted to add that I think research translation is very important in that space, because as you mentioned, the average time that you spend on a post is very small. So I think as academics, I think also the way they post is long-minded. So sometimes it's very difficult for, especially for the young people. They actually don't. I think their length of span of time that they spend on things that they've read more, just move on to the next post. I think that's where the biggest challenge is. And also, I also think that institutions like UCT, the speed at which things are being done is very slow. Because, I mean, if a tweet happens today, by the end of the week, they've moved on to the next one. But in coming up with guidelines and how to do things, I think it's taking too much time. I think that needs to sort of be improved.
Yeah, and that's really the power of social media and getting things out there quickly. But if we don't keep up with that pace, then we're at a loss. So really insightful comments and questions. Okay, one more and then we'll hand over to the panel. Yes.
Sorry, one last question. I was just wondering, do you guys have any advice regarding balancing personal brand and I guess an academic brand, and how you could blend those two? Is that advisable? Should you not? Should I have a burner instead and just you know what I mean? Like, so how could I coexist as personal brand and academic brand?
Yeah. Very insightful questions, and we might not have all the answers, but who would like to respond first? There was a specific question for Andrea. Do you want to start with that?
Sure, yeah, and thank you. Thanks for your question. And so I was reflecting on what you had asked. So you'd asked about, you know, should one focus on the goal and should one focus on the target audience? And the kind of rule that I think is really important to go by if you are going to use social media is that the moment you hit that send button, that irrespective of what platform you're on, you have to think that that message will go on a billboard that you will see on the side of the road. And are you comfortable with that? Would you be comfortable every day driving past that? Or in your future job that you apply for, that someone brings up that post that you mentioned? So I think starting from that perspective is, then what is your goal? Why are you hitting the send button? Are you hitting it because you want your 2 minutes of fame? This is a good opportunity for people to notice you, or do you have a broader goal? And I think as an environmental health professional, for me, it's, you know, I hit that send button because it's a professional. I have a goal that I want to either get some sort of information out. And as I said earlier, really, for me, it's this thing about saving lives, that, you know, people are being exposed to harmful things. So then the question about, you know, the target audience. In my field, a lot of people will say the comment of, you know, if people just knew the risks, they would behave differently. And they say things like, oh, we just need to do awareness raising. So there's this concept of getting information out and people will then protect themselves, which of course, as you're shaking your head, is false. You know, that's not the case. So for me, it's also at times to be very clear who has the agency to take that information I'm putting out to maybe impact the masses. So sometimes it's the regulators, but sometimes it is the mothers or whoever is going to the shop and buying doom and storing it with their food, for example. So it's I really feel quite strongly about that you should be clear about your goal and then clear about who can actually impact the target agent audience. Might not always be that you're directing to that. Yeah, I think I'll let the others respond and then I'll come back.
Go for it, Kerrin.
I'll just answer specifically to Leslie's point around the HPCSA. So you're absolutely right that is being reviewed at the moment within the HPCSAs around the misinformation. And we will know that there are some particularly well-known scientists, practitioners, who have been reported to the HPCSA. And precisely because the guidelines were less than clear, has made it quite difficult for the conduct inquiries to find adversely. Although, in general, providing incorrect information, whether it's on social media or not, is covered under the sort of general rules. So it hasn't been impossible, but it hasn't been particularly easy. So that is an area that's moving towards that. So I think that it's an important point, and I think that all of us need to be cognizant of that, and also feeding into to HPCSA guidelines as well as a national policy and provincial policies when they emerge. So there is often request for for consultation. They aren't well advertised, and those are the kind of areas that we should be looking at. Perhaps the personal brand versus academic brand. I think once again on the goal is you need to be clear about what the message is that you're wanting to be. It's a bit like a tattoo, right? Okay, when you are 70 years old and your skin is sagged and wrinkly, and are you happy with what the tattoo will look like? And so the same thing about social media is that, whatever message you put out today, in 50 years' time, because it will be there, are you happy with what that message is? And so I think in those kind of areas is to actually find somebody in your field that is a good academic, somebody that's trustworthy, and then kind of watch what they do. So most of the people that I do actually tend to steer clear of their own. Most people will publish their own publications, so will indicate their own findings, and so I suppose that's part of the personal branding. But for the rest, really stick to the sort of academic messaging rather than focusing on personal messaging. I have learned the hard way to be very clear about sharing the stuff amongst my friends and family and keeping that tight and making sure that that's not shareable, and that the messages that I do want to go out publicly are then open and that have that exact thought. If this were on a billboard, would I be comfortable that it can be shared by whomever, Trump included, and that it would land as it is. So I think you just have to be really conscious about what you do and why you do it, and find people to follow who you would admire and see kind of how they manage it.
But it is tricky because I've seen where academics have been called out, so they have a very strong personal profile, so they're very active, and then it's like, but why aren't you commenting on this important issue? You have so much to say about other things. So it's a very tricky balance to strike, and I've seen a lot of people withdraw from the personal part completely because of that. But a very nice point. Frissiano, any additional comments?
Yes, so in terms of like the engagement, so we have seen like in the past, some of our colleagues have been called to do interviews, but I feel like it is also our responsibility to seek those opportunities and to wait for an invite to come and do an interview. So it is also our responsibility to seek those opportunities so that we can have that voice out there without waiting for being invited. And also in terms of like the consumption and who do you decide the content is for. For our division, we've been also trying to revive the social media of our division of AP and Bio. So we've been creating in terms of which posts should be appropriate for LinkedIn or X. So it is something that we are also trying to decide which content should be posted in the different social media platforms. So those are the things that generally came up.
That's an interesting point, because tailoring for different platforms is important, but also time consuming. And I see having a chat online as well, where Pancho has asked what's happened to the Cider X profile. And the response is that we chose to keep our account dormant and move to Blue Sky since our center's goals don't align with MAGA or Musk. And many in our professional networks made the same move. And so this is, so some move and some don't. And some don't want to move because of the loss of the public attention, where Blue Sky is a little bit more exclusive. And I think this is something that we're grappling with and would help if we had more guidance on where should we really be active. Feroza, can I just ask Rethea if she's got any further comments to add, Rethea, and then we'll take the next round of comments.
I think one of the things so you guys work in a very complex arena, I think more so than just the normal social media pitfalls. And something that I think is very, very important is that there is a departmental strategy about what social media is used for, and that you then stick to that, and that you're very clear about what you want to achieve, and that you take steps to measure the outcomes. And and also that it's very clear that who's mandated to say what on social media. If there's for any particular staff member, if you post something or want to post something and you think that you might be misunderstood as speaking for the department or whatever, post a disclaimer. That would go some way to sort of keeping you safe, so to speak. But try not to blur the line between speaking as a staff member, where almost automatically you start speaking on behalf of the department. You might not have the mandate to say that or to do that. So be very clear on that, just sort of for your own sake. Also, I just want to note, if you have a dormant account on social media, I think that should be stated that this account is dormant and we are now active wherever, rather than just leave it and make it appear to be abandoned. Because one of the things that we do in the governance is we say that if something is abandoned, it must be taken offline. I don't have any other input.
That's very useful comments to take into account, especially those who run platforms for the department about dormant accounts. And it actually also reminded me that in one of our meetings, a colleague actually said the risk also of going off certain platforms is that somebody can create a platform in your name and you won't be aware of that. And so that is another big issue to consider if you choose to leave certain platforms. And so that's why some kind of presence might be of value. So something else to consider. But thank you, Rethea, for that very great guidelines. And I think maybe more than a departmental strategy, we need a faculty strategy, because public health, we might be bringing attention to this, but medical misinformation straddles the whole faculty. So perhaps we do need to look into it a little bit more and consider what we need to do more strategically. And I see Pancho has commented here that if we all move to Blue Sky, are we not, moving to our ivory towers again? And so that speaks to that point of that elitist academic environment that we seem to seek, because we struggle with that public engagement and the toxicity that often comes with it. Feroza?
So my point actually draws from that, is that I don't think we are doing anyone any favors by just shifting from one account to another when things become difficult and uncomfortable. And I know it's taxing and it causes a lot of anxiety, but then if you move into a platform where everyone's like-minded, who are you teaching? It comes back to the goals that you were talking about. Why do you want to put this information out there? What is the point of it? So educating an echo chamber is a waste of time. And we need to be in spaces where some discomfort is going to be caused, and where the learning goals are actually going to be attained. So I'm not sure if just shifting from one to another is a really good strategy. Maybe for your mental health, yes, but the goal is to educate them, no.
Yes, and I mean, Jem raised the point here that agree about the ivory towers, but anything that in any way supports Musk also seems wrong. And yeah, it's very tricky. I mean, we shouldn't pay him, definitely, but and these are the tricky spaces that we find ourselves in. Are there any? Yes, Emma.
My thing is you're giving Twitter legitimacy, and I agree that there's a difference between posting stuff independently and engaging, and I don't think that engaging is useful at a certain level, particularly probably not on Twitter. And again, also I don't know how, you say it depends on your goal, but your goal to educate isn't education. Are the people on Twitter going to take what you put on there seriously? Their minds are already made up. They're not going to change their mind because you put something else up.
But if you provide the evidence,
I don't think people care about the evidence.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure, Emma. So, like during COVID, when so much was unknown, I find it, so your mind wasn't made up about anything, and so there was that opportunity. And I think there are more people sitting on the fence than we realize. So you do have some who will never change their mind, but there are others. Do we have any other comments or questions from the audience? Yes.
I just wanted to ask the question. I mean, do we really think that engaging and arguing on Facebook or on Twitter or anything else is actually engaging with the community. Because I don't believe it is. It's engaging with the 5% who have set opinions, who are not going to change their minds anyway. I like the advice we got from our colleague online that said, put the real stuff out there and then disengage. Don't get into arguments.
Yes.
It's just a waste of time.
Yeah. No, I agree with that approach as well. Personally, I don't think getting into battles helps. And I showed you all that toxicity that I got, and I shielded it all from my daughter, but I showed her a few, and I said the response to this is to let the haters hate and not even respond in any way at all, and just let them be. And so I definitely agree with that approach, Tony. But I think we need to be cognizant of what is happening out there so that we're putting out the information. Because often if we completely disengage, we don't know what conversations are being amplified.
What does cognizant mean? Do we have to read all that?
Well, that's the thing. Like, one needs to have some kind of a presence to be able to see, okay, this is what's trending. This is what everyone's talking about. And then this is our statement on this issue. That's what I think. I think we do have that responsibility, especially when there are these controversial things. People look to see. Even if you take people, if you're an early career person, when there's uncertainty or controversy, you look to your seniors to see what do they think about this as you form your opinion. And so the public as well, when they're not sure. So for example, in America, they would look to the CDC and the FDA and all of that, but now people are saying, can we look to them anymore? And so that's why we need to have a bit more of an organized approach, in my opinion. Someone else said that? Was it you, Nisha? Yeah.
I also think we need to engage more with students because they know what's going on.
Yeah.
Because I think as academics, we really don't, we're in our own silos. We have got our own ways of doing things that we've been doing for a long time.
Yeah.
That we really don't know how the students are engaging in social media.
Yeah.
We need to engage more to sort of understand how things operate.
Yeah, I found it has, I have brought into student engagements issues around pseudoscience where we have had doctors themselves spreading misinformation. So I feel it's very important that we then call it out in those student spaces, because students look up to these clinicians and academics and professors and might not have that insight to be able to determine what is what is right, what is the truth, and how do we pursue the truth. So some very insightful comments. Any last burning comments or questions from the audience? Because if not, I see Rethea has commented that spreading actual evidence-based information on Musk's misinformation platform will have its own rewards. And I agree.
And risks.
And risks, absolutely.
It's a quotable quote.
Yes. Final comment from the audience before we wrap.
I just want to say from a different angle, there are a lot of dermatologists in private practice who are giving valuable information on Instagram, etc., and promoting their brand, yes, but also providing this information. And I was told in Oxengani that there's so much bureaucracy and gatekeeping here at UCT that sort of information can't easily come from our academic space.
Yeah, so I think that also ties in with Nesbitt's point about the slowness of responses, and maybe Rethea, that's something that can also be taken up in further discussions from an organizational perspective. So I'm going to give our panel an opportunity for some closing comments, and then we'll close off the session. Andrea?
Well, I think a lot of good things have been covered, and just to say thank you to Nisha for opening the conversation, and I do hope we continue it. Two sort of things that I was thinking about was that, we talked about putting messages out, but also you touched on it briefly in your presentation, the aspect of sharing, reposting. There have been academics who've been called out because they've reposted stuff and haven't actually read it. So just to make sure, if you repost anything, just take the time to read it. Do you agree actually with everything they said? And the other thing was, I find tagging important, because let others also share in the responsibility of the information. So I've tagged a consumer journalist before, and actually she ended up finding the answer to a question that I had put out to a very small following. So it's also, and I think that's a way of having more of a collective. Can we sort of share responses by tagging the right people that we would feel are the right people within our sort of subject. And I guess in a way that goes back to then this sharing, you know, are we going to create community? Is it sort of a communal response by tagging as well?
Absolutely.
Just some thoughts.
Thanks, Andrea. Kerrin?
So I think the point about students is really well taken, that we do need to be engaging with students in two-way, understanding, but also reminding them, because certainly in an undergraduate space, many still have not developed their prefrontal cortex and make some really poor decisions. So just because that's what I tend to deal with, are the poor decisions. And so it's also, so there's a mutual education and just around the permanence of putting stuff online. That it, you know, even if a photograph is taken, you know, you can, in the old days, you could tear it up. You can't tear up something that's posted online. So I think that's something that we just need to recognize. And when you're young, you don't see permanence as an issue. Nothing's kind of forever. But I did want to speak a little earlier about the audience, and I just wanted to remind. So I think that the harm, the potential harm, and the risk to us is around those who do respond. I think a lot of my thought in posting is about what some people have called the lurkers. Okay, so in WhatsApp groups, you know, the people who just permanently silent, but they still hang around, they don't leave, they don't say anything, okay, and the same on any, when you're sharing, it's the lurkers, okay, it's the people who read, don't comment, and I think that's a lot of the audience that we don't think about. Yeah. So those who are on the borderline, those who are questioning, those who don't know. So I think that the, you know, responding to those who've already made up their minds is pointless. But I think we need to be cognizant of the lurkers, and that's really where, and that's really difficult, because you're not getting feedback to say that that's useful or important or anything else.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Thanks for that, Kerrin. Frissiano?
Thank you for all the feedback and the comments. My last one is just we should also, in a way, acknowledge that social media is here. We're living in the world of social media, but of course, we should be mindful in terms of what is it that we are sharing and what is it that we are posting, and in a way, how can we navigate some of the controversial things that are shared in the public. So we should, in a way, also embrace the power of social media, but we should be careful in terms of how we are using it.
Thanks, Frissiano. Very profound words to close off with. And I just want to give Rethea a last opportunity for any final comments, Rethea.
I don't have any.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. A huge thank you to our panel, online and in person, for being brave enough to, you know, to accept the invitation. And even though this is such a new topic, and when none of us really are experts in it, we really appreciate your insights and perspectives and your time, especially in this very busy time of the year. So a huge thank you to our panelists, and thank you to you all for coming and sharing. Bye to everyone online.